I made so much food last night. Yeah, we were juiced this morning. And this guy made desserts for everybody last night, so. Well, he heard we were going to do it, and he's like, bye. He didn't trust us, but he just stepped over the kitchen, which was great. Kay and I just stood back and got the pie. He asked permission. He did, and then he took over. It came out way better than we could have done it, so next one. Well, there are always tricks. You know, I made my first raw pie in 1973, so I think I talent pretty well. Okay, my name is Aajonus Vonderplanitz, and I got into health and nutrition because I was a very sickly person. I was born into a violent household. I had a brother who was 18 months older than I. He was still in diapers when I came home from the hospital, and he was very unhappy that I took all the attention away. You know, it was instant. You know, you've got a new infant like that, the mother has to put all the attention there. So he started abusing me from the day I got home. Started pulling my hair, pinching me. I had big bruises, and they just started to bump the cribs, you know. Got my bruises from the cribs. And then we got to the point where I could actually walk. He would push me on anything rusty. Because my mother's a nurse, so, you know, of course, immediately go to the hospital and get injections, and I'd be sick for days. And that was usually from tetanus shots. So at 18 months old, it was the third tetanus shot because my brother had pushed me on a rake or, you know, a rusty nail or something like that. So at the number 3 tetanus shot, it made me autistic. I don't know how many of you know that in vaccines, even though they claim they don't anymore, they say, you know, mercury-free. They're not. They just have a new name for it and don't call it thimerosal. Instead of calling it a preservative, now we call it an antiseptic. You know that methylated mercurochrome are liquid mercury. That's what they are. They're poison. They're meant to poison everything. Of course, that keeps bacteria down. But what is the result of that? It's a neurotoxin. So if you have questions, write your question down, and there'll be a Q&A at the end, because I guarantee you 99% of every question you have will be answered by the time the meeting is over. And if I take your question, one time I took my questions, one of the first ones I did many, many years ago in New York, we went till midnight. The interruption, you know, questions on questions, and if you follow what I say, it'll all work out in the end quicker. So in vaccines, they've got liquid mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, ether, and one of the detergents. If I put all that into a little soup and blended it and gave it to you, would you all drink it? That's what they inject into you every time. Flu vaccines, all of them. So that was my brain. It does cause autism. Of course, the pharmaceutical industry and governmental bodies are trying to protect themselves, because if it were actually accepted on a governmental level with pharmaceutical houses, you could sue them. Every child that has a learning disorder, you could sue. The test came out just last week that chimpanzees who are given all of the childhood vaccines exhibit all of the learning disorders as humans, even the autism. So, and all the chimpanzees that bred from them for years and years under laboratory experiments did not show learning disorders, only when they started getting the vaccines. So at 18 months old, I developed autism. My brain could not fathom printed language, spoken language with concepts. By the time I was 8 years old, I had learned to parrot sounds, so I would learn sound patterns. And because I had a learning disorder there, I would say, you know, if somebody said, you know, a word, I would make it into a malaprop, you know, and it wasn't the correct one. It took me many, many years to develop that. So when I did finally develop enough language, what did I mimic? That I heard at home. Because usually the teacher's up there ranting, raving, and of course never saying the same phrases over and over unless it was for, you know, reprimand. And those I learned well. So, If the teacher called on me, I would say, shut up and sit down. That's what I heard at home. So this is the kind of thing that I was doing. And these nuns did not like that. And of course, they would, it got to the point where they got so frustrated with me because I didn't look autistic. My parents never let me drift off. Anytime I go off into the drift, my mother would slap me on the back, my father would slap me on the back of the head. So anytime I went into that staring phase, they would not allow me to go there in their presence. Because in my room it was different. And I rarely slept. I slept more in school than I slept anywhere else, but I learned to sleep with my eyes open so I wouldn't get in trouble. And I could sleep with my eyes open, and the light didn't distract me. So it was a very difficult learning process for me. My brother continued to do me great harm up until the Vietnam War started, and he went off into the Vietnam War as soon as he was 16 years old, 16 and a half. I was 15 at the time, so it's a big break. Tremendous difference because I didn't have to fear for my life. He would come into the room and while I was sleeping and punch me right in the diaphragm. I'd wake, with my eyes open, I'm not unable to breathe, and I'd pass out completely. So it was a great trauma. I had lots of medication, had lots of problems. I was not allowed to play with other children in sports because I was so delicate. I would break bones very easily. It would snap. And that was from all that formaldehyde and mercury and ether getting into tissues. When you subject bone tissue at very early ages, it causes brittleness because it robs the fat out of it. It even has a tendency to rob the fat from the bone marrow. I'm the smallest person in my family, so I never got to develop properly, develop well. Well, I'm not the shortest anymore. All of them are short, and I stayed exactly the same as I did. I was 16 and a half years old, just 5'7" 3/4. And most people, by the time they reach 62 years old, they've shrunk, a couple of inches. So my brothers have, I'm not as short as I used to be, according to them, in comparison with them. So by the time I was 12 years old, I developed a case of peritonitis, misdiagnosis, and appendicitis. And they went in to remove the appendix, found it in good shape, took it out anyway just in case it caused me trouble in the future. And that's the way the medical profession thinks, that they can't understand it and make rational of why the body has this. And, they just live with their stupidity. I can't call it ignorance because it's stupidity at that point. So I ripped it out. And in my experiments with animals who have appendixes, when you remove the appendix, the response time for any invasive chemical that comes into the body, any foreign bacteria, the response time to react in the body, counter it if it is a toxin, is lengthened by almost 50 times. If you have an appendix, usually your body will react in 20 to 40 minutes, hour and a half at the very most, 90 minutes at the very most. And your body produces antigens or neutralizing compounds to take care of whatever entered the body that could cause some difficulty or complications, whether it's in the blood, lymph, or neurological system, or muscle tissue, or whatever, connective tissue. When you don't have an appendix, it takes 36 hours because the body has to reanalyze that toxin, decide on a chemical to counter it. The appendix is a library of everything that's been in the body. And and I've been saying this for 20-some years, and one of the medical groups that I gave a talk to at Harvard, and I also gave one to Yale 25 years ago. 20 years ago at Harvard, and one of the professors came out just a month ago and said, guess what, the pancreas holds the memory of all bacteria and compounds that come into the body. It took him 20 years. pardon?
Appendix?
The appendix, excuse me, did I say that?
Pancreas.
Yeah, pancreas. The appendix. So the appendix is your library. So you don't want to get rid of it, because your response time, there could be a lot of damage done in 36 hours. So anyway, they removed my appendix. It didn't solve the problem. I had intestinal cramps and pains for another 4 days, and they were injecting me with chemicals, antibiotics, penicillins every 2 to 4 hours. So by the time 4 days rolled around, I was swollen, bruised, black and blue all over my body. Severe agony, couldn't sleep, couldn't roll over anywhere because they were injecting me everywhere. And in fact, when they had bruised the buttocks and the arms so badly, they started on the thigh. So at that point, when the nurse came at me with the tray, it went up in the air. I wasn't going to have any more. And they'd come inject me while I slept for a few minutes. So then when I got really angry and started breaking things, and then they stopped. Within 24 hours of getting no treatment because I wouldn't let them near me, I was able to get out of the hospital. Not well, but I was able to get out of the hospital. So that created a whole slew of health problems. My health problems descended, my health descended over the corresponding next 2 years pretty severely. So even though you have a medication, you don't have a direct response from it. The response can take 10 years sometimes. And this also a Harvard full professor came out with a report on that. On mainly was talking about vaccines, that they can have a 30 to 40 year reaction when your body is isolated in a particular part of the body. And as you grow older, everything breaks down, those chemicals re-release, you're in trouble. It causes all kinds of neurological damage 30, 40 years later. So it's like a time bomb that sits in your body. So by the time I hit 15 and a half, I developed diabetes, juvenile diabetes, which means the pancreas didn't develop, or produce, manufacture insulin. Also developed angina pectoris, the same within a month of the same. Also directly following my third polio vaccine, within 2 weeks or 10 days of that. So my angina was, angina is heart attacks. It's muscle spasms in and around the heart. It's like you get a Charlie horse in your leg, imagine that in your heart. So I was going through severe angina. I would have them. Sometimes I would pass out. The pain was so bad. So my mother took me to the doctor, and because I was ripping my chest and passing out. And of course, I don't have language. Still didn't have language. I couldn't explain what was going on. I knew pain was the word for, pain. Putting it down, P-A-I-N. There's no way. I couldn't even spell the word God with comprehension. I could copy things and parrot, but still no comprehension. So pain was just a sound that I knew corresponded with pain. So with, aching and pain in the body. So they took me to the heart specialist, my mother did, and EEG, KGs were all fine. So the doctor said it's all in his head. This is an autistic person that can't reason or anything else. I've created this psychological difficulty, right? So just remember, anytime the doctors can't explain anything, you cause a problem with your brain. Absurd. Of course, when they look for heart disease, they look for irregularities in the tissue or congestive heart problems. I didn't have either. They don't check for chemical compounds that can get into the tissue to cause spasms. If they look at a Charlie horse, they don't say Charlie horse doesn't exist. You create it in your head. You've got some kind of chemical compound, usually uric acid formation or lactic acid that have crystallized, and those crystals poke the nerves and the muscles and cause the spasm. So you just have to relax so the points of those crystals stop stabbing the muscle, and then the pain goes away. So that's what was happening in my heart from the polio, the mercury, the formaldehyde, the ether, and the detergents, and the aluminum had gone to my heart, settled in my heart, and my pancreas. So, of course, they didn't work properly. I had, from 15 and a half years old to 22 years old, I started eating raw foods and all my angina stopped. Stopped on the week. And I had about 300 heart attacks in those years. 50 of them made me unconscious. But because I was autistic, I was basically an idiot. I hadn't learned concepts to sabotage myself. So when I went into a heart attack, it was complete relaxation because instinctively, intuitively, when I forced myself to relax, the pain would go away quicker. So I could manage it. But sometimes, 20 minutes went by when they were still going on. I'd pass out, fall on the floor in school, and just leave me there because they did not want to add to getting attention because that's why I created them in the first place. I wanted attention. So that was what they said was the reason for my angina. And so from there, 15 and a half years old, a lot more problems. By the time I was 8 years old, I was so chronically fatigued that I used to sneak into the kitchen at night when my parents were asleep and take their cold coffee. And I'd mix that in milk or soda during the day to give me energy because I had absolutely no energy. I was chronically fatigued. Fibromyalgia. Just moving in the morning, everything was painful. Wiggling my toes, I could go into a cramp, toe cramp. So I was not an athlete. I did not play sports. I couldn't. So I stood at home and learned how to bake, sew, and stuff like that with my mother. So, of course, I was ribbed as a sissy. Of course, I didn't understand what sissy meant. And all of those ridiculed me. I could care less if they ridiculed me as long as they didn't handle me. So that was not an issue or problem with me. So by the time I got into school, I had not developed any more good phrases, so I went into a Catholic high school with Franciscan priests, and I was telling them to shut up, sit down, be quiet, leave me alone, the phrases that were consistent in my household. So, Franciscan priests don't take anything, so with a fist. I had my head split open, and I was the worst student, because again, I didn't look autistic. I had learned that people leave me alone if I looked cool. So everybody was wild over James Dean in the 50s, so I started striking his toes and things, doing cool positions. And then people thought, oh, he's a tough guy, you better not mess with him. So by the time, I was always getting beat on because if somebody tried to communicate with me, I would say unkind things, to everybody. So, of course, I got beat a lot. I got picked on a lot. So what I did, when I reached the 6th grade, I learned to pick the biggest kid in the school, no matter what grade he was in, and beat the hell out of him the first week in school. And everybody left me alone every year after that. Same thing happened in high school. I went in as a freshman, picked the biggest senior I could find, and beat the hell out of him. And because I was basically an animal, an instinctive animal, as soon as it wasn't hard to get them outside of the schoolyard, to get them into a fight. But I was a sucker puncher, right in the throat immediately. First was in the throat. That was it. You can't breathe. It's like a shining light in a deer's eyes. They just stopped. So from then I went to the temples, between the eyes. I just kept beating on them until they couldn't move or they were unconscious. Everybody leave me alone for the whole year. So for me that was worth it, taking a guy down, because that was my survival. I'm not saying it was a good thing, a nice thing to do, but it's what I did for survival in the circumstances. Because, there's more of a conscious now about autism and learning disorders, so there's more comprehension about it, and it'd probably be easier, but for me in the 40s and 50s and 60s, it was impossible for anybody to understand where I came from, what I did. And my first day of my sophomore year in high school, I got expelled. They saw me walk in the door. I got the stuff, to go back to school. My parents put me on the bus. Off to school I go. I sit there, just don't hear a thing, all the time. But I walked in to school, and the priest just flipped out and sent me home that first day. That was the worst disciplinary problem they ever had. I had 45 days of detention my freshman year, 2 weeks of sanding crew, and 2 weekends of shoveling coal. When you were really bad, you came on weekends and you shoved the coal for the furnace. And so that's what they were running on furnace. And coal, what does it have as a byproduct? Mercury. So that's what caused the Black Plague, as far as I can understand. The Queen, and the King of England owned the coal mines of the world at that time, and the Asian, the Asian enterprise, what was it called? The big company, Asian company it was called, and it was owned by the King and Queen of England. So they created more wealth by their salt and their coal than anything else. And you burn coal in your household without proper ventilation, your lungs get full of mercury, and it builds up over many generations. You're going to have a Black Plague. The farmers didn't have it. They used wood, to burn and cook with. Only the city dwellers, where on every other corner you had either a jewelry smith or a blacksmith burning their heavy metals, in their kilns and their blacksmithing, I forget what they're called, to heat up the metal, and the metal vapors went all through the streets, narrow streets, so it just infected everybody. So after, a couple of 100 years in every generation, it builds up, and all of these people just came down with a serious disease. A lot of them may say, well, how's that possible? If you look at the work of Pottinger, who took 900 cats over a 10-year period and fed them different diets, the ones he fed on processed food like evaporated powdered milk, mixing it with water, they got the worst diseases, and you couldn't put two cats together in the same cage because they'd kill each other. The behavioral problems were extreme in heavily processed foods. And it only took 5 generations to become completely extinct. 5 generations of cats. By the 3rd generation, they relatively lost potency. By the 5th generation, there were no other reproductions, and that was the end. And those that reproduced in 3rd and 4th generations were scarce. So can you imagine your offspring growing up and you're staying in this environment, and each generation gets sicker and sicker and weaker in the lungs, the whole respiratory system? Of course, you're going to have a Black Plague. But let's blame it on the rats, because we certainly don't want to stop living this way. We get to drink out of silver cups full of mercury. We get lead, in our cups, and we get all this good way of living. We have the wheel, we have weapons, we have all this great technology. Let's certainly not give it up. Let's blame it on the rats. So that's our civilization today. Blame it on bacteria. Blame it on some bird, avian flu. Remember in the 70s it was the swine flu. The pigs were going to treat all the diseases that killed everybody in the world. And who propagates this bull? The pharmaceutical industry, because they want you to take their vaccine, because it's all about money. So I drank coffee. I smoked cigarettes to give myself energy, or else I couldn't get out of the bed. I would sip alcohol to get rid of the pain. So I was sneaking all of these things, while my parents were asleep when I couldn't sleep during the night. So I had my little containers, my mother had the thermoses and everything, so I'd already have them loaded, before she'd start putting stuff in it. She did look. She took them out of the cupboard where she cleaned it and everything. So of course it's okay, but I had a little bit of fluid in there, coffee or whatever it was. And that was a big chocolate eater because that would also stimulate me. Also, it helped eradicate some of the pain that I had throughout my body. Because what does chocolate have? Chocolate has not only caffeine, it has theobromine and theophysine. All three are nerve irritants and stimulants. So I could get very wired. I was eating, a whole box of 50 chocolate-covered cherries in 40 minutes. I was fat. A big kid. And that's the only way I could function, like eating a lot of this garbage and staying wired. And still, I was a very mellow kid. That was just enough to stimulate. And the other kid would have been running around like, a basket case. So, by the time I reached 16, there was no sleep. I couldn't sleep awake or lying down with my eyes closed. So I started drinking a tremendous amount of alcohol. By the time I was 19, I was consuming a fifth of alcohol a day, either bourbon or gin. Drinking gin's a sin to the nervous system. But that's what I'd have to do to go to sleep at night. Lived on 2 packs of non-filtered Lucky Strikes a day, 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and a fifth of gin at night for me to sleep, and 11 cups of coffee a day minimum with lots of chocolate too. So that's how I lived. And then at 19, I met a girl when I was almost 16 years old. She was second smartest girl in the school, and we had a nonverbal, total body communication. It was not only sexual, it was just being in each other's presence. We both would just laugh and feel good. So, and she was so smart, all the teachers were telling her, "You with that guy? He's an idiot. He can't learn, he doesn't apply himself," stuff like this. And at the time, I didn't know. I knew they were saying derogatory things about me, but I could care less because I didn't understand what they were saying. But, now that I can recall what they had said, and now that I have the mentality to understand, I know what they were saying. So, she just continued with me. We got married at 16. I was 16 years old. She was a year older than I. And, she had a baby the first week of my senior year in high school. And I got by through school by cheating. I would always pick the smartest, most sensitive girl in the class who would never, never deny me the ability to cheat off of her paper. So each classroom I picked out a girl that was like that. In high school, because in high school there was a changing of classes, but in grade school it was the same person I'd always stick to the whole year. So I would copy the hieroglyphs. Of course, sometimes the mind wasn't exactly accurate. I had pretty good photographic memory, but sometimes I'd write the word God, but because her handwriting was different, and every print was different. Some books were printing in one style, another, so I could not fathom getting them into saying that this is the same T means the same thing, and DTHE, no matter how the graphics were organized, was the same word. So it's just still impossible for me. So sometimes I was writing things that weren't even words, that weren't even true letters, because I couldn't organize that kind of thinking. But I had developed, by this time, television was in. I was allowed to watch television after my hour and a half to 2 hours at the dinner table. The reason I had to stay an hour to 2 hours at the dinner table every night was because cooked vegetables made me vomit almost instantly as soon as I swallowed them. Sometimes they're in my mouth, and I tried to swallow. Lima beans, broccoli, Brussels sprouts were the worst. I could hit that wall, projectile vomit. It was that convulsive. So they would beat me. And my father would beat me with wiffle ball bats, and they were the worst. And he was sawed off, 2x4s, honed paddles, stuff like that. So the Franciscan priest. And that was really bad. So my father would beat me with anything, so, I had to deal with, I had to do whatever they said. So it was getting those cooked vegetables down was a chore every night. They would only let me have one glass of milk, so I couldn't just wash it down. I had to mash it up, put off all my senses, take a teaspoon of milk at a time and get it down. Then I'd have to wait 3 to 4 minutes to stop the convulsive reaction to vomit until it settled and moved a little bit to settle down. So it was a long time to get 2 vegetables at each meal down. Potatoes wasn't a problem as long as I slathered it with butter. So I put lots of butter on it and went down pretty easily. Okay. And I did like mashed potatoes with either gravy or lots of gravy. 3 times the gravy anybody else would have, or 3 times the butter. And then margarine came out, then it wasn't the same. Then I couldn't eat the potatoes the same way, because the margarine would just sit in my stomach. Everybody know margarine is hydrogenated vegetable oils, has the same molecular structure as plastic. Exactly the same molecular structure as plastic. In fact, that's how they make plastic. Are the steps to make margarine. So all of those cooked vegetable oils were a problem. So I had problems then. So I was conditioned, and then when I left home at 16, I lived on cereals and pasteurized milk, donuts, RC Cola, pies, lots of candy, alcohol, coffee. It was my diet. I could have been a policeman. Not much brain function, but some physiological, muscular activity. Then when I was 19 years old, I'd been divorced. My old wife realized when we moved in together, I was really living with an idiot. She still didn't leave me. She was still there for me, but because she had a baby and it was so stressful on her, she never recovered. So she didn't like me anymore. She stuck with me. She stayed with me, took care of things. It was good, but I wasn't. She didn't give me any attention. I was gone. So the high school let me go to school in the morning so I could take care of the baby in the afternoon and go to work at night. So my parents arranged all of that. Of course, I couldn't articulate to get that kind of arrangement with my parents' arrangement, so I would finish high school. So it got to be that, I didn't see her for, 10, 20 minutes a day, and, she'd want me touching her sexually at night or when I got home from work, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I hung out with the guy. We were drinking every night after work. A huge alcoholic. I'd sleep, while the baby slept in the afternoon together when he wasn't screaming all the time. And then we got a divorce. I moved to California. I had an uncle who was matriculating for his doctorate in psychology at UCLA, and he was a TA, teaching assistant. He graduated with, as a magna cum laude graduate from Hunter College in New York City. He got that position at UCLA, and that was, in '66. I moved out to California. He thought that he could help me. Put me in with the LSD program and stuff like that, and I was completely immune to it, Or they gave me the placebo is what I think it was, because somebody gave me some acid outside of that when I got into the music and entertainment industry by accident. A lot of drugs were available, and I took the LSD from them, and I definitely had trips. So I think that at UCLA I was given the placebo, and it didn't work. And they were telling me I was getting, up to 700 micrograms and no reaction. So I figured I was just on the placebo. Didn't get it. But anyway, went through all of that. My uncle wasn't able to help my disorders at all, so I wasn't able to go to college. However, before I left to go to California for a 9-month period, my mother took me to this new school. It was called Cincinnati Institute of Technology. And what it was a new school that taught computer programming and unit record wiring equipment. And at that time, everything was wires and punch cards, you know. And you have to write a program, and then it gets punched in a card, and then it goes through, and that's how you programmed the computer, and then every digital card that came in after that kind of calculated and computed from whatever registered from those cards. So my mother took me to that school, and my brother, who was the one who was painful to me all the time right before when he flunked this, he went right into the military. And no, so he went at 17. I was 16 when he went. So he flunked it. They gave no language comprehension test. They just gave geometry and mathematical tests. And I was an idiot savant. Gave me a problem in math, I wrote the answer. Don't know how I got the answers, but I had the answers. It was instant. So they they always accused me of cheating in math, because I never put the formula how I got it. Yet I was finished the test sooner than anybody else. How could they accuse me of cheating? They figured that I had some telepathy at one point, they figured. Or that I went in and got into the teacher's stuff and got the answer results. So they had all kinds of ways to devise that I had cheated. Cheating on everything else except for art. And you know, the math, they were constantly on me about. So I went into this, I got one of the highest grades that they'd ever gotten. So they realized what they had. These were young and bright people who produced the school. Nobody was over the age of 40. And they were very, you know, they had come from, you know, higher graduate degrees at some of the Purdue, ITT, some of the big tech schools. And they realized what they had with me, so they farmed me out. They would bring me problems given to me, and I would write the solution. They would write all of the printed literature, and then I got to make a lot of money being an idiot. And they paid me well, and they did take very good care of me. They were protecting their investment so much that a 27-year-old teacher became my lover. They were that much keeping me in control. And even though I had a wife at home and everything, and a baby. So, but they farmed me out. Everything went well. I was farmed out to these trucking companies at first as a test program. And then when I went to California, I went with the third largest trucking company in the world as a systems analyst, and for the Carte Blanche Corporation, which was then the biggest credit card company ever, the first and the biggest. Diners Club followed, and all the others followed after those. And the Arco company screwed that one up. Avco, I mean, financial screwed that credit card company up. Anyway, they give me a resolution. They had a project they'd been working on for 6.5 years to no avail. I took care of it in 3 months, made them a fortune. So I was an idiot, making a lot of money, had a 2-bedroom house in Beverly Hills. I was an idiot. Couldn't write anything but my name, and there was no comprehension about writing my name. I couldn't tell you what the word D meant, I meant, C meant, K meant, and I knew that they had some kind of meaning, but I couldn't fathom it, because my brain didn't work that way. But I really didn't know. I thought that D, each letter had a meaning that I couldn't fathom. I didn't know that just words had the meanings and the concepts. My brain was that much damaged. So at 19 years old, after I'd gotten out to California and started drinking heavier, got into a crowd, my uncle and his group, they were out partying a lot. And so I partied with them, doing a lot of drinking. I started vomiting blood heavily one night after about a year. And it was pretty bad. I vomited probably a cup of blood. And went to the hospital. They found I had a huge ulcer in my stomach from all the caffeine, the icing, the alcohol, and I couldn't seal it. They put me on Maalox. I was drinking sometimes a whole bottle of Maalox a day, and that's like drinking a bowl of bottle of chalk. That's what it is. And so what it did was arrested all the hydrochloric acid, so started having digestive problems, started having a little acne the first time in my life. There was one problem I didn't have, acne. Can you imagine about having acne as a teenager? And, I didn't have a problem with it anyway because I didn't have that kind of an ego sense about my appearance. I still looked cool, though. Still followed, the James Dean look all the way through, and then it was Elvis. So those are the two I mimicked as far as appearance. And look, dress and all. I see what I dress, I go into the store, and that's what I buy. The white bobby socks with my, white bucks and stuff like that. That's what I did. So I got very sick from the Maalox. The Maalox churned the area around the ulcer into a tumor. So then I had stomach cancer. So they said, we got to go in. They cut you open. We had to do a bigotomy pyeloplasty, which means they severed all the vagus nerves to my stomach, so I'd never again secrete hydrochloric acid. Put me in the category of the octogenarians. I didn't know what all this meant. You just do what the doctor said. So I let them perform the surgery, got out of the surgery, couldn't ingest anything. I ate meat. I had huge pustulations. If I see Lawyer with James, the comedian, and he's a lawyer and he lies all the time, as the lawyer should.
Oh, Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey, yes, liar, not lawyer, liar, yes. So, one of his workers has this huge white pustulation of his nose. He just wants to squeeze it and get rid of it. Well, I had them from head to the knees. All over my back, everywhere. I ate meat, cooked meat. So I couldn't eat meat. I became a vegetarian at that point. But then I would crave the meat so badly, and I loved the meat, but I couldn't eat it. So I would eat it maybe once a month and deal for about 10 days. All this pustulation, all this abscesses would come out through my skin. So everything just got worse and worse. Then the incision within a few months had gone tumorous. So, it got up to almost 3/4 of an inch high, up to 1.5 inches wide, this tumor on my stomach, on my outer abdomen, not the actual stomach. That was cancerous again. So they said, okay, we're going to have to irradiate it. So they gave me 10 weeks of intense irradiation therapy. By the time they finished, this was my movement. Because what they had done was, they had given me so much irradiation, they had cauterized my spine through my stomach by irradiating me here. So it's like taking malleable clay and putting it in a kiln and firing it about 6 to 10. So it solidified my spine. And I was in constant excruciating pain. Crippled me. I lived on the floor. I couldn't work anymore. So I was living on the actual floor in the living room, on a wood floor. I had to get rid of all the carpets, almost all the furniture. I kept the couch in there because sometimes I could roll up on it and then I'd have to roll back off because no matter how I slept, I couldn't sleep more than 10 minutes at a time. I'd work awake in excruciating pain from my spine, generating out to the rest of my body, my knees, my thighs, my spine, the sciatic all the way down to my feet. The sciatic then goes to the knees, and then from the knees it branches out to smaller areas that are not called sciatic nerves or belts. So, but I had pain everywhere. So it was compound like fibromyalgia that I had. It was just soreness and achiness every time I moved. This was excruciating pain everywhere. So I had to live on the floor, awake in excruciating pain. I had to, when I could, get on his hand to defecate in because I couldn't make it to the bathroom. If I had to go to the bathroom, it was about 40 feet away from the living room. It was between the two. The living room was here like this, kitchen over here, and this section over here is like a little nook. The 2 bedrooms were back here, and the bathroom was way over here because these were closets. So from the living room, I would have to go all the way into the bathroom, a good 40 feet of crawling along the floor. And this is the way I had to move. Because if I moved my leg, I was in excruciating pain. So I was alone on the floor, pulling my body along. And it would take me 30 minutes to get to the bathroom. Never made it. So they had to clear all the furniture out of the bedrooms and out of the house. And it took everything but the drapes, and the drapes held the urine and the fecal matter. I refused to go to a hospice because I wasn't going to say all these unkind things. I learned what was unkind, though, by that time my uncle helped me. And I knew what words to stay away from, but if you don't talk to somebody who's talking to you, they get upset. So I did not want to go into a hospice. They took me there, saw the people who were there. They were suffering, bald, they'd been to chemotherapy, radiation, all kinds of, surgeries. They were not in good shape. These people were not happy people. There was no way I was going to go spend my last days there. And they let me know, and I knew what death was. I wanted to die my whole life, so that was no problem. So I said, I'll go home, I'll die in my own waste products at home. So they got 2 volunteers from the hospice to come in to my place 2 to 3 days a week. They would shop, come into my, bringing the food to my house, my donuts, my RC Cola. Also, after I had the radiation therapy, they gave me so much, I lost all the bone around my teeth. My body had deteriorated, taken the bone to put it down to my spine, so let my teeth go. So my teeth dangled in my gums. So if I bit, even on my own teeth, I bleed half a cup of blood at a time before it would stop. And I had to get injections weekly of coagulants to make sure my blood clot, so-called vitamin K. And let me tell you, any produced, I don't care if it's from food or what, vitamin, has no relationship, molecularly in structure, to any natural vitamin that's in a raw food. Totally different and bizarre. It's like, give me a old crude, let's say if I didn't have an arm, old crude prosthesis, compared to a living raw, natural, fluctuating, movable, dexterous arm. And that's the difference between a vitamin supplement and a true vitamin in a food. It's that drastic of a difference. So again, that's a big marketing scheme. There's a book, I refer to it in my book, The Recipe for Living Without Disease. A doctor that goes into explaining the difference in the compounds that are in a natural vitamin compared to a processed supplement, whether it's from a food or not, whether it's natural or not, natural source. They blended out. They had to blend everything I ate. Excuse me, Mom. Is this open now? He said, just open it and flip it over, but he didn't tell me how to open it.
You had to disengage it, and then it's
Oh. I just had to use a little bit more force. So, can you imagine having donuts blended with RC Cola and drinking out of a straw that big around and fat? Well, that's what I was doing. I was eating everything. A bowl of, a whole blender jar of, sugar crisp. And I was one of those diabetics that ate tons of sugar because I was constantly shooting up insulin. So, of course, you want to counterbalance because you get low blood sugar from all the insulin, so you want all the sugar, or else you go into a coma, insulin shock. So I was, sugar crisp is sweet. I put another 4 tablespoons in per bowl of sugar crisp, and then with RC Cola or Sprite, that was a nice combination. RC Cola and Sprite, sugar crisp and Sprite is a good combo. So I was eating very badly. I was just vomiting all the time, defecating, urinating on myself. Sometimes I lie around in it for 3 days before and this went on for about 14 days. well, probably about 20 days by the time one of the, a substitute volunteer came in, 18-year-old African-American boy, stood about 6'3", 6'4", had this velvety smooth voice, very dear, sweet man. He was making a fortune because he was in the entertainment industry as a singer. And the Fifth Dimension group was sponsoring him, and another group called The Source. He was one of the Source. He was also hired by the Ford Motor Company as the going thing, and they went around singing all over the world, the better idea, Ford's a better idea. And so there was this kind African-American boy, 18 years old, in there helping me, and he said, "You need to drink raw carrot juice and raw milk." I'm still autistic. I don't know what he's talking about. I know the word carrot related to those things my mother used to overcook, and she overcooked everything. So I think I vomited everything. And I hated carrots. Of course, they made me vomit too. They weren't as bad as Brussels sprouts, broccoli, or lima beans, or peas, but it still made me vomit. So carrot, I didn't understand carrot juice, what that was. But he was drinking it. So he coaxed me into drinking it. And it was the first thing that had any flavor, because once I had I had chemotherapy for 3 months before it came to this, and I was left with no hair, coming out little straggly gray patches. I couldn't control my reins at all at that point. So he got me into drinking raw carrot juice and raw milk. Within almost 10 days, my autism, I woke one morning and I understood concepts, language, words. Oh, that's a verb, that's a noun. All this stuff just all of a sudden came together. So I called Steve Flanagan was his name, and I said, "Steve, I don't know what this stuff is doing. I'm only eating that stuff that you bring, the raw milk and the carrot juice. I'll stop eating everything else, because everything tasted like cardboard. After the surgery and the chemotherapy, let me tell you, everything tasted like postage stamps or cardboard. And postage stamps aren't very delicious." So, oh, here we go. So, drinking this carrot juice and milk, it had flavor. Not a lot at the time, but still it had flavor. And it was probably the first thing that was enjoyable for months. And so I drank it, and then the autism went off. So he was very happy for me, made sure I kept getting my supply, called my uncle at UCLA, and I said, "Hey, this is Aajonus, and I'm good." But after that, he said, he thought it was a friend of his, an attorney friend who plays jokes on him, which mimicking my voice and having an intelligent conversation. So he didn't believe it was me until I started telling him things that had happened that only I would know that he did in my presence. So, because we roomed together. We had a 2-bedroom apartment. We stayed together when I first got out to California. Then I got the place in Beverly Hills. But for almost a year, we roomed together. So he realized it was me, and he said, "I really can't believe this, but, what are you going to do about this?" I said, "Well, I just want to learn. I want to learn. And the first thing I'm going to do, because obviously it's this food," he said, "it may not be the food. It may be that your mind finally just opened up, some brain center just opened. So don't think it was the food." I said, "Yeah, but I can tell it does something to me." He said, "But don't go there. Don't go there. Food isn't that important." That's coming from the regular academic system that tells you that. Medication's all important, but food no. So I called Steve. Well, he said, "If you're going to get some books, the first book that you need to get," he says, "is Sid Hartha. You're a diehard Republican asshole as a parrot, and you need to get a broader spectrum of behavior. There's compassion out there." He's saying all these words, I don't have a clue what they are. So I called Steve, and at that time I was crippled. I was a worm on the floor. So Steve got a wheelchair for me, took me to a bookstore. Also, I was bankrupt by that time. I was getting evicted. And I thought everybody thought I'd be dead by the time I got out of the house, so it wouldn't matter. So put me in a wheelchair, went to a bookstore. He loaned me $110 to buy these books. And in 1969, you could buy a thick softback book for like 75 cents was the most expensive. You could buy them for 10 cents. You could buy them for 50 cents. That's how much a good book was. So we bought all these books, and even a hardback. Most expensive hardback was like $2.95, and that was expensive. So for $110, I got a lot of books. So I did get that book, and I wrote it down. Didn't quite put I didn't get quite spelled right, even though he's giving me the spelling. But Steve was able to figure it out. So we went in, and Steve went in and said, this book is on diet, nutrition. So I bought all these books and said Arthur, and 2 on mind over matter. So 110 books in 1969 was a lot of books. So I went home and did nothing but on a dictionary. The dictionary, a big dictionary like this was $3, $2.95. An unabridged, big, fat dictionary. So I spent the whole week reading that thin book on Sid Harper, 90 pages, something like that. I spent tons of hours in the dictionary looking up definitions of definitions of the words in the definitions so I couldn't figure out anything. So it was like, I was like a child learning at 21 years old, learning 22 years old, almost 22, learning language. So, but it was exciting because it was a new playground for me. So I was reading and nothing but, sit at home and continue smoking because it did give me energy and, making messes, but that got under control within a month. So I was able to go in jars and pans. I still have to deal with excruciating pain, 18 hours of every day. So I learned to get into a bathtub. Then I learned to sleep. It was a 12-foot tub, and you fill it high and hot. And I learned by getting into a bath. That within 20 minutes of getting into a hot bath, most of the pain would leave, especially if I put lots of Epsom salt or sea salt in the water. It would make my body buoyant. So I didn't have all that pressure on my spine and back and legs and everything. So it was a whole new experience. So I was reading in the bathtub and sleeping in the bathtub almost 18 hours a day. I lived in the bathtub. And I would oil my body with olive oil or cod liver oil. I don't really stunk, but I couldn't smell after chemotherapy. And I was in the house alone. People came into the volunteers came in the house. Ooh, it smelled like dying fish. Something like that. And, I have all those old being prevented because, you get water in salt bath, So you're very dry. So that prevented that. And Steve helped me with all of that. Imagine an 18-year-old boy this educated and came out of Watts, no father or anything. Pretty traumatic, growing up and to be just optimistic and happy and kind. 18-years old volunteering all of this time and making a fortune, not going out and getting, bruised up and high like everybody else in the music business at that time. So it's a great influence on me. And Sid Harper was about this guy who grows up in a wealthy family, affluent, goes and becomes a whoremonger, a thief, a murderer, everything, and then comes back to himself, finds himself, becomes self-realized, becomes like a shaman, a Buddhist, priest or something like that. So you have this spectrum of somebody going through all this stuff, and I thought behaviors I had no clue about because my parents watched Peter Mason and all the cowboy shows. My mother loved cowboy shows. So it was The Lawman, Yancey Derringer, what was it, the James Garner show, Maverick, Bonanza. Those were all the shows. So that's all I got exposed to. Use the gun or use your fist. And this was behavior that I saw throughout my family. So this gave me a whole other perspective into behavior. I thought people can be nice. People can be thoughtful. People can be gentle and all of this. So it gave me a whole new perspective on reality. So my life was starting to develop when I was going to die in a few months. And still there was no sign that I was not going to die. I was just getting better and feeling better. So after about a year and a half, almost 2 years of this, I was walking. I was still painfully. And I was doing things. I got into the motion picture. I got expelled from, evicted from that house. Just at that same time, Steve had left his, he had traveled a lot, throughout the world. So he left his Mach 1. Everybody know what a Mach 1 is? It was the first high-powered, really souped-up Mustang. It was a big one, and it had a sound system. You could just live in there. The sound system was so incredible. And, this was at that time, this was a $6,000 automobile. And you didn't pay $6,000 for any of my automobiles. And I got in 1966, I bought my first new car, a Malibu Chevy, for $2,000. And this was a Malibu Chevelle. That was an expensive car. So this was a $6,000 car. So he let me have it while he'd go away. And I was driving down Sunset Boulevard at Schwab's, past Schwab's. I didn't understand the motion picture industry, any of that. I had no experience in any other industry other than my mathematics. And there's these two guys hanging way down a taxi, and I knew that in L.A. you don't wave down taxis. You call a taxi. You can't flag a taxi down in L.A. So I stopped to pick up these two guys. My language was good enough by this time. And I said, you'll have to call a taxi. You can't fly the taxi down here. And I said, well, where are you going? He said, we're going about a mile and a half down to a certain hotel on the Strip. I said, well, hop in, I'll take you. So I took him around. That led me into, he was an exiled prince from Russia, and she was Tina Scala, the sister of Gia Scala, the famous actress in the 50s. So they turned me on to coming to a party that night at MGM. So I found myself, a few months later in a television series called Medical Center, with Chad Everett and James Daly. And all I had to do was spout out words that, even though I didn't understand, it didn't make any difference, because I had been autistic. All you do is emote. You just make some kind of, expression of your feelings, and you say words that don't have to mean anything. So I was a good actor at that, as long as I could memorize the lines. And sometimes, because I didn't have language really down, and I was used to doing malaprops, I would malaprop my lines. And they thought I was playing with them. And Chad Everett was a good comedian. I mean, he would break the setup quite a few times. So I found myself making a lot of money again as an idiot, as an actor. And I'm not saying that actors are idiots. Most of them today are not. Back then, most of your actors were idiots. And, or not really highly cognitive. So, it just snowballed into other things, so I was able to make a living differently at that point. And my life was improving by the age of 27. I was in pretty good shape, still had a lot of back problems. I had to do yoga. I learned all these different things. I went through diets, named and unnamed, all the literature that I had read from all those books, and then books on top of that. Also got a tutor for 3.5 years who was considered the brightest, most progressive nutritionist in all of the United States, Bruno Carigliano in Los Angeles. He tutored me for 3.5 years. He was an Italian who had a weight problem, so he was mainly into raw foods. That's why I liked him and saw his assistant. And he, without even blinking an eye, he accepted to help me. I just, stroke of blessed, luck. So, but he had this fat phobia. You eat fat, and you eat mainly raw foods, but you reduce the amount of fat because he felt he had a weight problem. He was never huge, but he was a good 15, 18 pounds overweight, according to the chart that was in that month. But for him, being a nutritionist, He always wanted to be slim and trim, but could never be. His appetite, his instinct would let him go there. But he would get really rough on me about eating fats, but when I ate the fats, I always felt the best. I could drink a whole cup of raw cream, and I'd go to sleep for a few hours because it was difficult digesting it. But I'd wake up feeling more energy, more relaxed, more calm. Raw butter the same way. So he followed, a raw diet about 75-80%. So he was pretty good, very bright man. I went to a symposium where he was invited at UCLA and USC. All of their doctors and nutritionists and dietitians came together for a big symposium on nutrition. And it was organized by the USDA, the federal USDA. And he answered 70% of all the questions that nobody else could answer. 30%, all the other panelists answered. Anything that couldn't be answered, he could answer. So I had a very good tutor there. But at the end of 3 years, it got to the point where he was just obsessed about just not letting me eat fat. He would do it in the closet, but then didn't want me to do it. So a little bit of a hypocrisy there. So I let him go, and I said, I'm not going to learn what I need to learn because everybody is a theorist, a nutritional theorist, a dietitian who is a theorist dietitian. No experience. They go into a school, learn the crap that the USDA puts together for them on nutrient value and food value and the food pyramid, and you know how that changes. From every decade it changes a little bit. So I realized I was not going to find the answers by me being in society. So I put some important basic books in saddlebags on an Italian Levy touring bicycle. It's called the Girls' Bike. In Europe it's called a mixed frame. You're not a pussy if you ride a bike that doesn't have a bar and the bar goes down this way. Because you're carrying that much weight and you lose my back problems, I'd crack my, testicles on this bar and I'd be incapacitated. So there's no way I was going to ride with a bar there. Because I had to get off that bike quickly because of my back problem. I didn't want to hit that bar and deal with a bar there. And I had 4 saddlebags loaded with physiology and biochemistry books. That will give you the basic structure of the body, the rest of the chemistry and all of that. I just throw away that came from any academic system. So I was going to live outdoors in the wild forever. And I was going to learn. I was going to live in Indian tribes, with animals, and discover what where true health comes from. So, I was still not that well doing this kind of journey. So I was eating 8 to 10 avocados to eat enough fat, and I could get the raw butter. In West California, those kind of things weren't readily available. And anyway, then, shortly after I got out there bicycling around, I met a lot of vegetarians, taught me into vegetarianism, that the dairy and all that stuff was bad for me. So I wanted to become a raw food vegetarian, mainly a fruitarian. So, my diabetes, even though I stopped taking insulin, cold turkey. Within a few days, almost a week after taking the raw milk and raw carrots. Cold turkey, of course, I had some bouts of passing out, stand up and everything went black, and I'd get on my knees instantly, quickly lay down on the floor so I didn't fall and split my head open or break my teeth. And the bone grew back from drinking the raw milk in 6 months on my gums. I still wasn't able to chew very well for another 1.5 years without some bleeding. But that milk helped restore my bones around my feet pretty quickly. So I was bicycling around. I at first, because it was winter, I left on December 31st, 1973 on my excursion. So you're looking at winter. So I'm living in a sleeping bag outdoors. It rains in California from January through February. I used to, anyway, and it was pouring those times. Sometimes one time it rained for 28 days straight. And, it gets cold out there. Even if you're in Southern California in the desert, you can get down to ice freezing at night. And, it could be 80 degrees in the day, freezing at night. That's what a temperature change. So I was just stuffing myself with nuts and avocados and anything, any fruit that I could get just to fill myself. And I had to really keep myself warm. I used a down sleeping bag. I had a plastic parachute sleeve that I had made to keep the heat in and keep the moisture off in the sleeping bag. And that was like an oven in there. It was like a sauna. So it was great. And not like a sauna, it was like a steam bath with my perspiration. Eating all that juicy fruit kept the moisture in the sleeping bag. Of course, I'd wake up wet in the morning, but I didn't mind. I was warm. But getting out of freezing cold was pretty bad. And it got worse, when I stopped eating all the fruit because I get too thin, perspired too much. At the point, after 2.5 years of living outdoors, I got down to about 113 pounds living as a fruitarian. And my bones were in excruciating pain again. Felt like the bone cancer had come back with a vengeance. The radiation therapy had cauterized my spine, and also caused cancer of blood and bone, multiple myeloma. Left out that little detail. And then as a response from the radiation therapy for this and the bone marrow, they gave me chemotherapy for the multiple myeloma, and that gave me lymphoma. So I had 4 types of cancer. I'm the only person who survived 3 months of those cancers. It's 40 years, folks. 40 years I survived that stuff because I got away from the medical provider. So I lived in the winter time, I had to go way down into Mexico where it was warmer. So I took my bike all the way down to Yucatan, and that's a long trip. It took months. By the time I got down there, it was spring, and everything was nice. It was warm down there. I lived with an Indian tribe, the Mayans. First, I lived with the Yaqui for a month, because they couldn't bicycle all the whole South Mexican continent, in one stretch. So I bicycle about 60 to 90 miles a day. And that's bicycling 10, 11 hours a day. It's not very far. Because I'd have to get off the bike every hour and a half and go into yoga postures to stretch my back out, because I'd be in excruciating pain. So I lived with the Yaqui Indians, and then for a month, and they told me, what you need to do is you need to eat raw meat. I said, raw meat? There's no way. Brain flukes. You parasites, I'll be an idiot again, and, it makes me break out, meat makes me break out. I didn't correlate raw for everything else. Why not raw meat? I was brainwashed. I was absolutely blindfolded, about the meat being raw. Everything else was good raw, but not meat. So I went down and lived with the Mayans. The young still spoke Mayan. And, of course, having been autistic, it's very easy to communicate with somebody who doesn't know language, since I was a place of not knowing language. So it's very easy with gestures, attitudes, looks, feelings, to communicate with all these tribes. They also said, offer me raw meat. They said, this is what you need. I keep asking for other, formulas, herbal formulas. Nobody would give it to me, just kept giving me raw meat. So then I went back to the United States. In the summer I worked in the date orchards, picking dates, making some money, so I could be a little bit freer. And then, after that season was over, then I started bicycling north again and all. Went across the United States 5 times with my bicycle. And then my last year out there, after 2.5 years, I went to Alaska. So that was my last summer trip. So I made it to Alaska last week in August, and I lived found a tribe who still was primitive, Yaqui tribe. And of course, I lived with the Sioux Indians. My mother's side way back was a Sioux Indian in the family. So they had a good sense about that. Took me in for a little over a month, and they too told me raw meat was what I needed. Wouldn't go there. I thought they were trying to abuse this poor white idiot that's taken over, the world, being mean to this white boy. So, and that's what I thought. Why would they want me to do this with raw meat? So I got to Alaska, the same thing there. I refused to, and that's all they eat was raw meat. I never saw them cook anything, the wild tribes. They had this stuff they dug out of the ground. There was a hide. They unwrapped the hide, and there was this black, green, patina, mold, fungus growing around the stuff. And it smelled rank. I mean, it's terrible. It made me just want to vomit. Vomit. And I wasn't that close to it, probably 6 or 7 feet away. And the children smelled it. They're jumping up and down. You call it cotton candy, something like that. And all the adults are smelling it, And then there's this bird call coming from way down in the valley. And they wrapped it up and reburied it. I said, what are you doing? What was it? They said, well, it didn't smell but half a mile downwind, so it's not ready. You have to let it age a little bit longer. So a week later, they dig it out, and it's ready. The call came through that it was okay, and they dug a lot of them out. There were probably 20 of these wrappings, and it smelled even worse. If I got within 5 feet, I actually started vomiting, dry heaving. And they're just eating it. The kids are eating. I mean, I saw a 2-year-old eat a handful this much. And all the adults are eating like a pound each. And there's a lot of it. And the stench is just terrible. I got a headache from it. And they're just happy and dancing. They're having games and they're getting all this smelly stuff all over them. And I thought, yes, this is savage. All the stuff that I believed about, they're savage. Yes. They're very dirty and they're unsocial. This is the first time I'd ever seen this kind of behavior, this rank food. But because I didn't know meat, I didn't know gangrene was a fungus that actually turns green on the skin, and it's a green mold, it's a green fungus. And I didn't understand. I thought meat, when I saw the desert, the ants would eat the muscle tissue until they got hard as rock, and they could cut it with their pincers, and no coyote could rip it to pieces because it was leather, and you had bones and leather. And it then turns to dust after many, many years of drying out in the sun and everything beating it until it became sand. It was dirt. So I didn't realize the meat would turn all those colors if you buried it in the ground and let it, sit and age there. So when they told me it was, a caribou beaten into a mince, told me it was seal blubber, and then, aged under the ground, well, we didn't let that. That was their pemmican. But they sliced the meat and they rolled it, with the lard and buried it. And I had no idea, flesh molded, got fungus in it. So I didn't believe them, I thought it was herbs that had been molded. They were all happy and having a good time, so I decided to eat some. So I said, but every time I tried it, I was vomiting flaming down in my stomach. So they took I had some cotton balls they had taken with me, because sometimes I have severe nosebleeds. And the only way I could stop them was sticking cotton balls up there. So they took musk oil, real balls, balls from a moose, the oil from moose balls. And that's the musk oil, true musk oil. And they put it on the cotton balls, stuck it on my nose, and I ate this about ping-pong ball-sized amount of stuff. And just melted, like braised and brandy lamb, just melts in your mouth. It was down, it was rank and foul, feeling pretty good, felt high, felt happy, and, I went back to my sleeping bag. At this time I was aching everywhere, so I had to get to the sleeping bag usually before the sun went down, because even an hour after the sun went down, I was in pain. So I got into my sleeping bag, and I'd always wake at 3, 4 in the morning before the sun came up. I just have to lie there and meditate in some pain. And, I wasn't able to keep the moisture in, or didn't have any moisture anymore. I was so thin. And even though I drink 2 gallons of water a day, I'd piss it all out. I'd be skinnier and drier. My skin got drier and drier every day. I didn't drink quite as much. I drank probably a gallon of water in Alaska because it was cooler. And it does when I was drinking 2 gallons of water a day. So, went back to my sleeping bag, and the day before, getting out of my sleeping bag, it was 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours, with the sun beating on the sleeping bag. Crawling out of the sleeping bag, I did enough mitigated pain. I was able to crawl out of the sleeping bag. And then I always slept naked. And then when I get out of the sleeping bag, I lie in the sun directly for 30, 45 minutes. And then I was able to function with very little pain. I also, when I was lying in the sun, I'd do the spinal twists, and the crossovers, to get my back stretched out while it was still more limber than any other time of the day. And then I'd be functional. Well, after this foul-smelling stuff, and it didn't taste bad, because when you've got some kind of odor up your nose, you can't taste anything. So I guess I thought I was eating, moose testicles. My body thought I was eating moose testicles. So, that morning, 45 minutes the sun beating on the sleeping bag, I was out of the sleeping bag. 10 minutes in the sun, I was mobile. So I went back to the elderly man, the chief, whatever you call him. I forget what they called him. And it was internment in German. And I said, what was the herbal combination? It was caribou and seal blubber. And, of course, I didn't believe him. I thought, again, this is a white boy. We're not going to give you anything. Taken over the world. You screwed it up. You polluted it. I'm not going to help you get well. So I did, after, another week there, they only had that festival once a year. There's no more of that stuff. So I was getting back in the same state. My bones were aching again. It was near the end of September. Getting very cold in Alaska. The snow was already falling, So too cold to bicycle from Alaska, so I bungee corded my bike to the sidecar in a freight train, boxcar, and hung my hammock, with the doors open. I hung my hammock from one diagonally to the other, so I could just rock back and forth and watch the beautiful scenery. So, sometimes the train takes side trips where I had to get off that train and onto another. I was pretty safe doing it. A lot of people get killed, a lot of hobos and hot freight trains, and I've seen a couple of them get beat to death because they don't want you jumping on this train. It never bothered me because when I left, I was bearded and long-haired, and I wore robes in the time of Jesus. So nobody screwed me. Except in Mexico, they got a little offended. Some federales backed me up with machine guns. And then as they looked at me, they decided, maybe we better not, just in case. One time, some Border Patrol officers had jumped on my, boxcar, and some, they called them railroad detectives, jumped on. I had 3 guns pointed at me, cocked and ready. And I got my bicycle bungee cord, and I'm standing here looking like Jesus in my robe, and they all just stand there, stunned. And for 2 minutes, they just stared. And they said, stay out of sight. And got off and left me there. And I saw other people look in and say, stay out of sight, some others. So they never threw me off. Not once did I ever get thrown off. So I took most of the time, sometimes I had to bicycle a couple 100 miles, here and there to get back to a train that was going in the right direction after I'd been taken off in the wrong direction. Like I thought, I was, all the way down to Los Angeles, and, I thought, I'm going to get all the way down to, where I want to go, all the way out to Palm Desert, where I want to go. And it kept going. He kept going all the way to Arizona, so I had to bicycle all the way back, back to, where I wanted to be in the Coachella Valley, below Palm Springs, where I was going to fast myself to death. Because I was just in pain, I didn't find the answer. Multiple myeloma was coming out with a vengeance again. I was down to 113 pounds, skin and bone, not happy. So I picked an old Indian burial ground that I had sometimes set up camp in while I was working the date orchards, and had some people that I had known help me build a rock-embedded 10-by-10 house with all the rock we could find locally, and 5.5 feet into the ground so it would be cooler. It was at the foothills of the mountain, old Indian burial ground area, so I was pretty well protected. And during the hot of the humid day, I'd go and stay in the caves. And just only kind of... Isn't that great? Oh, yeah. It was all raw meat and everything. Everybody like it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're kidding.
You gotta get brain. I get to watch you go crazy in the zombie of St. Louis. There you go. Oh, you decided to get a comfortable place.
Absolutely. No. I'm not used to sit all day, so. Yeah.
I can believe that. Some people I know have a lot of adrenaline and other hormones pumping that makes them want to be physically active a lot. If you have that problem, you just find a wall to stand on if you like and bounce around. Fine. Because you need to do that. Somebody brought a little girl to me last year, and I wasn't sure why they brought her to me. She's got, I think she was between 9 and 11 years old, I remember. And the parent dominated so I was talking to them, I shot her irises and for what's going on with the child, and at the last I read the activity rings. The activity rings tell me how much activity that person has to have in a day, because it tells me how much hormones like adrenaline, testosterone, estrogen, which are motivating, physically oriented hormones that make you active. It can tell me how much a person generates, so I can suggest how many hours a day they need to be active or exercise. So this little girl had the most I've ever seen. Most athletes have 7 to 11. This little girl had 14. So I said, you're going to have a real big problem with this young lady if you expect her to be normal. I would not put her in any kind of a school unless you know it's a sports school where she exercises 20 to 30 minutes every hour. She has 14 activity rings. And I said, if you want her to be normal and be in any regular school, she's not going to be able to do it. She won't be able to sit still. I looked back at the little girl, and she's sitting in the chair, and she's going like this. Like that. She can't sit still. And I said, you see? And she said, that's why we brought her. And I said, that's it. All I have to say is, put her on a good diet, she'll calm down some, but she has 14 activity rings, most I've ever seen. She's going to have to be active 20 to 30 minutes every hour. So don't put her in a school. You're just going to be unhappy. They're going to medicate her until she's an idiot. So don't do it. So anybody who feels like they need to get up and move around, go hit a wall and dance on that wall. It's okay. I understand. I see you guys way back there. You like the comfortable chairs. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
I'll just need to say, if anybody, there's seating over there for the taking. Never mind, it's taken.
Jeff, the recorder.
I moved out to the world of digital, so I've got
yeah.
a digital one behind you, and that's going to go for 3 hours, so.
Okay, let's put it over here.
All right. Tripod, sort of.
You need a cushion so it doesn't catch this noise. Okay, so what we're going to do, all I'm going to do is right now tell you how the human body is supposed to work. So you'll never be afraid of it again. The way the doctors, the pharmaceutical industry hooks you in is fear. It's like it got us into an Iraq war and all those other wars. Remember the Russians were coming? The Russians were coming, for 30 years, and the Russians never got here. And all these other countries are going to come and take us over. Now it's these religious fanatics are going to take over the world. We got to go kill them. So that is the whole thing. Fear generates all of the stuff that you do, basically. So if you understand the human body, you won't be afraid of it. You'll see how it works itself if you take care of it and feed it properly. It does very well. So starting in the mouth, when we put food into the mouth, starts digestion. We have all kinds of bacteria. We have more bacteria in the mouth than a dog or a cat. If you get bitten by another human, if you think you got bacteria before, you got a lot of bacteria after a human bites you. Almost 3 times more than the dog and the cat has. So why do we have bacteria in the mouth? Because we are a bacteria-oriented organism. We eat meat, dairy, animal products, and it requires bacteria to break that down. We only have one alkalinizing enzyme in the salivary gland, and that is chylate, same as the horse. So when we eat that little bit of fruit, we can digest it, but just enough for a little amount of fruit. Apes, gorillas don't eat any fresh fruit. They only eat bananas, and they eat them hard green with the peel with it. If you've ever tried to eat a banana like that, you just don't have the salivary. It's like alum. It's very drying. Not fun at all. If you guys want to move up closer, that's great, if you'd like. Just because those seats were occupied before, there's a back there, but it's up to you. Just giving you permission. In the monkeys, do you ever see a relaxed monkey? No, they're either masturbating or pulling their hair, jumping around, or fidgeting, or screaming, or screeching. Why? Because they live on fruit. Fruit causes them to be erratic and crazy. But I'll get into that more later. So we have mainly bacteria in the mouth. Starts digestion, it goes down into the stomach. What do we have mainly in the stomach? Hydrochloric acid and more bacteria. Especially the Campylobacter bacteria. Oh, the Campylobacter causes ulcers and other vessel problems. No, it doesn't. It's part of the digestive activity. But E. coli causes disease, doesn't it? No, it's the final stage of digestion. And I'll get to that. So the food goes into the stomach. So why is there hydrochloric acid? Mainly hydrochloric acid that dumps in the stomach. What does hydrochloric acid digest? Animal products. Not vegetation, not fruits. It handles meats and dairy. So hydrochloric acid starts to dissolve it, the meats, dairy products. Moves through to the duodenum. First part of it, we have one stomach, 2 compartments. The second compartment, the duodenum of the stomach, bile enters there. Bile digests fat. It breaks down fats into smaller units, particles, molecules that can be reassembled
and made into various kinds of fats. Then the food moves down into the small intestine, where we secrete hydrochloric acid, lots of bacteria, including salmonella and lots of coliform. All those things to digest animal flesh, animal foods, not vegetation, not fruit, basically animal products. Then we go into this large intestine, the bowel, the final stage, and that's where we have the main colonies of E. coli in 10. What do E. coli do? E. coli break down the fats and the protein molecules into the smallest particles to feed the brain and the nervous system. So if you have depression, you have a E. coli problem. Deficiency in E. coli or mutated E. coli. There are drugs and chemicals that can cause 10 to 12% of depression that exists, and if people are taking those medications on a daily basis, it can be 90% of their reason for depression. But depression in the average person is not taking medication. 95% of that depression comes from a low E. coli environment. E. coli is never, ever, ever a pathogen. Salmonella is never, ever, ever a pathogen when it's in the human body doing its job. The way they call it a pathogen is these university technicians want to make a name for themselves, get some scholastic merit. They take these petri dishes, do all kinds of different mixtures and formulas for cells to live in, then they'll add these bacteria, and all of a sudden the bacteria are in a foreign environment. They're not doing the job that they normally do in the digestive tract. So they start eating apart cells because they have nothing else to eat. So it looks like they start degenerating this tissue. But not when they're in a natural environment. They are not pathogens. That is the work of the pharmaceutical, medical, and food industry to get you to be afraid of bacteria. Without bacteria, you would not digest the thing. You digest maybe 13% of all the food that you eat, and not well, and not assimilate or utilize it well. So bacteria is a major part of our entire system. Our entire system is made of, we finally came across an article where somebody was coherent. A microbiologist says we have 600 million varieties of bacteria in the human body, and most of it is to make us healthy and strong. It helps formulate all kinds of cellular structures. It is so complex, the bacterial system, we cannot do without it. So you've got to not be afraid of bacteria, parasites, and fungus. Never be afraid of virus. They're not even alive. When you read somewhere, oh, they got a live virus. That's somebody who doesn't know chemistry at all. In fact, we have some chemists saying the same thing. And biochemists say, oh, we got a live virus. It is a misnomer. No virus is alive. Viruses have no nucleus, they have no respiratory, no digestive tract. They are not alive. They are a mass, a collection of specifically structured proteins that have a reaction when they come in contact with tissue. It is a cleansing product, but I'll get into that later. So when you have that E. coli down there, you're going to be a happy person. They made E. coli out the worst guy in the world. It's going to create the greatest disease. Oh, E. coli 157H7. I've searched for that creature everywhere in nature, and I can't find it. The only place that I found it was in one university in California who got it from the federal government. So it looks like this E. coli 157H7, 0157H7, is actually a man-made organism that they're using to point the finger at. That spinach thing in California, I went to a whole area and there was no 015787. Didn't come in any of my lab tests. Wasn't even in any of the manures used to fertilize those fields. And all the fields that were blamed were chemical fertilizers. Chemically fertilized fields, not organic fields, but I still couldn't find the 15787. There is a ploy out there to destroy your mind about good food and throw the blame on disease where it doesn't exist. And that's toward bacteria in your food. You're not going to get sick by eating good, fresh food, period. No E. coli is ever going to enter your body and get past your hydrochloric acid. It doesn't do it in my body, and I have no stomach hydrochloric acid. So something very wrong with that picture you're being brainwashed with. It's a sad picture, but 99% of the public is suckered with it. So they're going out and buying all these chemicals, poisoning their homes, Clorox. You go to a store now, and you go into the meat department, and you can't breathe because of the chloroform in the air from all the Clorox they're using. They tell you this chloroform that causes brain damage, lung damage, sinus damage, eye damage. They're saying this is better for you than taking a chance on eating a little E. coli or salmonella or some other bacteria. Poison yourself. The leading bacteria, which we're used to for hundreds of millions of years as animals. It's a symbiotic relationship. So all those chemicals are going into killing bacteria and making your house sterile is really what's killing you and causing your illness. Sure. Cooked foods, there's a problem with cooked foods. They cause byproducts which are heterocyclic amines, lipid peroxides, and other compounds that cause damage and deterioration of the body. But nothing like the industrial chemicals that are created and the additives put in prepackaged, long shelf life foods. Those are the real culprits. And remember the tests that I showed that were done in Canada in the 50s and 60s with food additives and what it did to the children. So remember that. Your problem is not bacteria, parasites, fungus, virus. It is the chemicals that they're flooding you with in your environment. So when the fecal matter goes through the to the sigmoid colon, that's the chamber before you have a bowel movement. Now a lot of people have constipation. Why do they have constipation? Because the E. coli is so low. Our food is so sterile. Packaged processed foods are so sterile. Our environment's so sterile that it kills the E. coli in the bowel. So you've got a limited culture of those growing and feeding on your food. Their secretions, their waste product is our food. That's how it works. Just like see a dog go around and eat somebody's fecal matter. A dog is meant to get rid of some of that waste product, use it as food and discard it so it even breaks down faster into nutrients and to our environment. Shellfish is the same way, bottom feeders, the fecal matter, fish fecal matter. That is their job. They're very healthy doing that. But beautiful lobsters and all those bottom feeders are. Those some are gorgeous creatures. Oh, but man, they're disgusting. Bottom feeders. Eat shit. Yeah, well, that's what they're supposed to eat. And that's what we eat from every bacteria in our body. We eat their secretions and excretions. That's our food. They've taken the food and eaten it. Their waste is our digested matter, which we can absorb and utilize. The lower your bacterial level in your intestines, the more intestinal problems you are going to have. The less nutrients you will assimilate and absorb, the less ability that you will have. Take a look, we have these graphs that show, the population living much, much longer. But how is it living longer? Is it helpful? When I was a child, in 1940s, you know, I used to watch at my grandparents' farm, you know, guys throwing bales of hay that were 90 pounds, 15 feet up into a loft with one hand. They weren't taking it like this and heaving it. Some of the smaller ones were when they just started working, but they have to be working well. Take a 90-pound bale with one hand and throw it up in the loft like that. You need forklifts. Every farmer's got a forklift now because they can't even lift a 30-pound bale of hay. Young kids, vital, strong kids, still they're not strong as they used to be 50, 60 years ago. They can't even throw a 30-pound bale up there without breaking their backs after 2 hours. There was something seriously wrong. My mother comes from one of 13 children. And every one of those kids was raised on raw milk in those days. My mother's now 90, my father's 93. My father grew up on a farm with raw milk. That is Constitution. That was a great Constitution. The only reason he's alive now because we have heating and air conditioning. Heating and air conditioning is the main problem with people who are living. The main reason, not problem, but the main reason that people are living so long. What happened 2 years ago when there was a loss of power in Europe in that country? 35,000 people died in a week from heat prostration. What happens when you lose the heat during the winter? How many people will die? In one day, 200 people died in a small city right outside of Poughkeepsie, New York. I think it's right outside of Poughkeepsie. Power failure, no heat during the winter, 200 people in that city died from freezing to death because it was too cold for them. These were elderly people. So it isn't technology except the technology of air conditioning. By air conditioning, I don't mean just the cooling system, the heating system of a room, a conditioning of your air. So that's keeping a lot of people alive. But people are not healthy like they used to be. I mean, even the athletes, you know, they're so far and few in between. When I was a kid, everybody was an athlete except me. The only kids that weren't athletes were the rich kids. They wore glasses, and their parents took them to doctors all the time. They had thick glasses. They were scrawny. Why? Because they got the most medication. Why is it that all the rich kids, except for those that had macho fathers and were nouveau riche, and didn't believe in medication back in those days, were healthy, but all those who were taken off to the doctor, anything that happened, were always protected from any kind of, any kind of vaccine that was out. Their kids got it because they were going to stay in touch. They were going to stay smart, protected. And those kids had Coke bottles, thick glasses, scrawny, whiny kids. I was one of those. Till I saw James Dean. Then I took on another act. I didn't get beat up and left alone. So, your digestion of your food and bacteria are synonymous. Don't be afraid of bacteria. Let's take the glandular system in the human body. We start with the pituitary. We know that the pituitary regulates somehow growth. Also keeps the body in communication with the rest of itself. Now, one thing that I noticed that in animals who are not in a fight and flight mode, hormone levels are very minuscule. So our endocrine gland system seems to be linked only with emergencies. Having adrenaline in your blood is for emergency. It's not supposed to be your normal activity fuel. And what are people driving on? Adrenaline, coffee, cigarettes, abuse, anything that will irritate the system, chemicals, You poison your body, what does your body create? It creates hormones. Hormones are almost 60% fat and about 25 to 40%, 25 to 30% protein and a small amount of carbohydrate. So they're very fat and protein-oriented substances. They're the only ones besides fat molecules that keep that ratio. And the body can use them like a fat molecule, like a phago or a fat cell, like a phagocyte. Goes in and consumes the toxicity. So we get a rush of adrenaline. Why? Because we've been poisoned. Candy, soda pop, cigarettes. The blood is poisoned. The digestive tract is poisoned. Do you know that every time you eat a cooked meal, 1/3 of your white blood cells leave your red blood cell stream and get into the intestinal tract to handle all of the toxicity? Once all of those byproducts are consumed by the white cells, half the white cells are damaged heavily, then they go back into the red bloodstream. You don't have the amount of energy that you had. So whereas, I go to Asia where they eat primitively, no canned foods, no pop, no anything. These guys work from sunrise, before sunrise, to sunset and beyond, and they have energy all day long. It doesn't diminish. These people in Asia work in the fields, in the rice fields, eat raw bugs and stuff like that, and they go with the same amount of energy all day long. Here in this country, you got 5 hours and you're ready to go to sleep. If you don't, you want to go out and drink a bunch of coffee, and a drink, and then you go out and you don't feel anything, so then you can have a party and you celebrate. So those people, when they get off work, unless they've been down in coffee or cigarettes, everybody's exhausted. This is not a good indication of our system, and it's not a good consciousness about how the body and the system works. So we know that the pituitary regulates some thought processes and some growth. Now, maybe that's not its job. Maybe its job is just dealing with consciousness activity and protecting the brain. Pineal gland, we can't seem to find what that is. The mystics say it's the bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, but we don't know. Come down to the tonsils. Those glands, they are filters. They keep poisons that you eat that are in your food, your toxic food, and it goes into it, absorbed into the mouth, into the tonsils. It prevents it from getting to the brain. So if you've had your tonsils removed, your brain has a lot more toxicity than a person, almost 5 times more than a person who does not have tonsils, than a person who has tonsils. So we've got the thyroid gland, and we say the thyroid gland regulates what? Hair growth? No. But the pharmaceutical wants you to believe that because what? How many women are willing to take thyroid because they won't lose their hair? How many would you, if you start losing your hair massively, and the pharmaceutical company tells you it's because your thyroid's low, your thyroxin's low? What would you do? You take the thyroxin. That's how they hook you. Thyroid has nothing to do with hair loss. Seen it in many experiments. Many people lose their hair without having interfered with thyroid gland. But the thyroid gland regulates what? Again, in case of emergency, it makes sure that swallowing is continual. You've even got backups on the thyroid gland. If you can't swallow and you can't breathe, what happens? You die. You die. So these hormones keep this area functioning. While you're asleep, you still swallow, you breathe. You've got parathyroids, 2 on each thyroid, each side of the thyroid gland. You've got 4 backups to these. That's how important breathing and eating and swallowing are. Also keeps the network open here. You've got basically four types of thyroxine. And they address the ability of flow. This is the smallest network where the most nutrients and blood, lymphatic, and neurological fluids flow through this neck here. And your spine is small through there. This is the most congested area besides your ears and eyeballs, where a lot of stuff is moving through. That thyroxine prevents any blockages that go into the area. Again, it's always for emergency purposes. Let's say somebody ran into Aajonus, when he was in the 7th grade, he got beat up, and he went for the throat. And how much thyroxine is produced for me hitting that guy in the throat? 5 to 10 times normal. Because he's got to open it up again, or else that guy will die fast. Okay? The thymus gland keeps those lungs and the heart functioning. Thyroxine also has to do with the heart. So it keeps this stuff moving that whether we're conscious or unconscious, is moving. Then we have the adrenal gland. Of course, they sit on top of the kidneys. Now, why would a gland be put on top of kidneys? What directly relates to the lower part of the body? Leg movement, fight or flight. It can go to the arms, it can go to the legs. So, of course, adrenaline has to do with physical movement and activity, fight or flight. Then you have the testicles, or the gonads, the ovaries. And what do? They create reproductive abilities. But it's always specific, not normal, everyday stuff. So we don't need all these hormones pumping in us. We shouldn't have all these hormones pumping in us unless we have a problem. Now our problem is the eating properly and all of our pollution. We're going to have these hormones raging. If you're lucky, you'll have them raging because they'll bind with toxins. If you're smart, you don't have to worry about being lucky. You eat properly, and you don't have to go on that level. You don't have to hope you're going to be lucky that day or that moment, because you'll have it in control. And the more you're on a good diet, like I'm going to explain for you, the more, instead of going toward death like I was 40 years ago, you'll be going toward more health every day. Now, I can sleep 3 hours a day, 3.5 hours a day. I work 20 hours a day and rarely get sleep. Once in a while, I might be in a console. I pass out for 3 minutes, in a stupor, see my eyes go. I sleep for that 3 minutes. I'm good for another 5 hours. That is the way we should function at that high level. Believe me, obviously, you're only 62 years old. You should be getting feeble. You're getting weaker, shouldn't you? You're getting shorter and smaller and all of that. No. If you're eating properly, you're like those tribes where the oldest, it looks almost as healthy as the youngest, can function every day. Maybe not do as much, but nearly. In the Andes, the tribes in the Andes, whether they're in Peru or in Ecuador, where they still have those primitive tribes that are non-contact tribes, there's a whole group of tribes which do a mutual ball run every year. It's a 100-mile run in the top of the Andes. And they have a thatched ball that they've made about this big, and they kick it. And they've got a team of usually 9 to 11 people. And they're lined up, and they go on these mountain trails. And the one in the front will kick the ball, and they're so good it goes direct and goes along the trail where they want to go. And then the one in the front, after he's kicked it, he'll move to the back and run. And they go for 100 miles. In the Andes, you understand there's 14,000 feet. You can hardly breathe. You can hardly get up, a flight of stairs for us in that kind of atmosphere. And these people, 90 years old, are doing this every year. So we shouldn't have synonymous. Deterioration and aging should never be synonymous. I've made these talks so long and one that incorporates the whole sentence in one word. I don't think you'll get it. So keep my language still stretched. Okay, so that covers the glands pretty much. Let's just go through the rest of the organs. Glands. We know what the lungs do. We know what the brain does. The brain keeps us in contact with the rest of the body. A lot of people who are very adept at sports, it is a natural condition. It isn't something they develop. Most athletes, it is an instinctive, automatic process, just like the beating of the heart. There are people that doesn't come natural to. Those people have to condition themselves and work at being athletes and having dexterity. Other people do not. Some people have a clear, thoughtful mind. Other people do not. So you have to understand what your abilities are, and then maybe eat a proper diet, and other things will follow through, just like my communication ability. Now you have to understand, in my gene line, there's a lot of geniuses in my gene line. My father invented the first bearing computer in 1938 when he was going to school at Purdue because he hated spending 35 minutes doing a math problem. So he created the first bearing computer that could do the same problem in 5 minutes. My mother came from a family of 13 children, every one of them college educated. That doesn't mean they're wise, but they've got good developed minds. In poor family. 13 children in a poor family, that's poor. But every one of them went to college, worked and got through college and graduated with high honors. You know, I've got 8 aunts and uncles who are nurses in that line, 3 doctors, scientists, all of that. And I was an idiot until I was 22 years old because of the way I was eating and the chemicals that were constantly intruded into my body, and it damaged the whole integrity of my system, my working system. So we have the lungs. We know that we take in oxygen. Oxygen is used to help utilize fat as fuel. Also, the breathing helps get rid of carbon dioxides that are in product of metabolism. The white cells take care of that. We have the liver. What is the liver? The liver has one function, one normal, healthy function, and that creates bile. It creates 60 varieties of bile, which will allow the body to form 60 varieties of cholesterol. A third of them will lubricate the body and protect it. A third of them will help clean the body. And a third of them will give you the greatest ratio of energy that a human body can produce. Do you know that a fat can give you 2.5 times more than carbohydrate or protein? 2.5 times more energy are produced by fat than they are with the same amount of protein or sugar. So should we be eating lots of fat?
Yes.
But when we talk, if you're an athlete, you got to go high carbohydrate diet. High carbohydrate diet. So what does a high carbohydrate diet mean in the human body? If you're a monkey, you'll be radical and crazy, masturbating all the time, and have a short life. That's what it will mean for a human too. You have a short life. Why did McEnroe burn out in his late 30s? Why do most of the athletes burn out in the late 30s? Why do athletes in the Andes and the tribes still athlete in their 90s? Because they predominantly eat fat. Doing Weston Price work with some of the tribes, when they before they did something very active-oriented, physically oriented, or a sport, they drank a cup of cream, raw cream. I don't suggest anybody else do that in here, because cream is the hardest fat to digest. It's very complex, so you have to have a tremendously well-working liver. I've had a few in my early days in the 70s, late 70s, when I got back, from all my travels, and I was working at Antilles Health Food Store. I dealt with lots of famous, athletes and actors, and they were open to anything if you gave them a good message, a good pitch line. So I had people taking the raw cream, really skinny guys, and they would do great with the raw cream. But if I gave raw cream to mostly women who were overweight, that were running a marathon, they were barfing for 2 hours. So there are some things that we can't eat and can't eat. So you have to find the fat that you can digest to give you your best energy so you build up so you can use raw cream. If raw cream is the slowest digesting one, you're going to have a longer battery reserve of fat to be raw cream. So that's what the primitives do and still do today, especially in Africa. But most of us, a lot of people are going to have a problem digesting the cream properly. And they may get nauseous, not able to compete, so you have to go for butter. And I'm going to get into the details of those a little bit further. So we have the liver. The liver's job is to create bile so that you can digest fats and use them for a myriad of healthful reasons. Now we have the gallbladder, which is attached to it. Now the gallbladder doesn't manufacture anything. It doesn't create bile. It is a storage chest for bile. Now why do we need a lot of bile? Well, when we were cave people living outdoors, let's say we killed an animal and we'd eat its fat first. All the tribes eat the fat first. If you're eating 10 pounds of fat in 24 hours, you better have a gallbladder with a reserve of bile, else you're going to have diarrhea for 2 weeks. So if you had your gallbladder removed, you better not eat ice cream more than a cup at a time. You better not eat a lot of fat at one time because you'll have diarrhea because you don't have the bile. The liver produces so much bile every hour. About a teaspoon to a tablespoon depending upon the person. And that builds up into a little gallbladder. But there's enough in that gallbladder to digest 20 pounds of fat. 20 pounds of fat in a 48-hour period. So you have your gallbladder removed, you better eat a little bit of fat every hour. A little bit more every 2 hours. Not more than that, or you're not going to digest it. You have digestive problems and possibly diarrhea. Good liquidy runny diarrhea. Okay, we have the pancreas. Very, very important gland and organ. I call it gland and organ because it handles digestion. Sure, it manufactures insulin, but insulin was a minor product of the pancreas. When we started getting heavily into cooked carbohydrates, that's when it became a massive insulin producer. We don't need much insulin if we're on a correct diet. Correct diet is not eating much carbohydrate. Insulin is very little needed. But what does the pancreas do otherwise? The pancreas is responsible for taking enzymes from the food that has entered the duodenum. It registers it. It tells the body how to reorganize it. It tells the body how much enzymes it needs to help the bacteria so that the bacteria will flourish and eat that content. So the pancreas is very important. Now what happens? The pancreas has become a filter, mainly handling insulin production and filtering it back. Both type 1 diabetes, which means that insulin isn't produced, or type 2 diabetes, that the insulin isn't able to be utilized properly. But again, it's the pharmaceutical industry giving you a line of bull because they want you to take medicine for every day, several times a day for the rest of your life. If you're a diabetic, they make $1,300 to $1,700 a day on you. $1,300 to $1,700. I mean, a week on you. A week, $1,700 a week. How much money is that? If you're a severe diabetic, if you're a mild diabetic, let's say it's $1,700, $1,300, $2,300 a month. Pharmaceutical makes a lot of money. How many diabetics are there in this country that take medication? 53 million. How many billions of dollars, or is that trillions, are making just off of diabetics? What happens with the pancreas nowadays? It gets worn out easily. We know that everybody's going to be a diabetic in their later life. The more processed, the more additives that are in the food, more processed foods, and the more additives that there are. Becomes pretty inane. So what happens? The pancreas has to take this cooked food, has to make hormones that it normally doesn't create, and they send out like little thugs, little mafia guys are going around every door and say, I need some of your good stuff. I need some enzymes, I need some proteins, I need some fats on good quality. So it goes and leaches from every cell in the body, a little at a time. Not enough to notice overnight, but over a 30, 40-year period, the body's whole bank account, the whole reserve that it's had, is gone. That's why when you get old, only what you eat and consume is that's all you have. You don't have any reserves left. You've spent your bank account. The pancreas is responsible for helping that process, to be able to use the garbage that you're eating when it's cooked and processed, so that you can at least maintain life. Quality of life is on you and your choices, when you realize it. So we have the spleen. Now what is the spleen? The spleen is like the gallbladder. It is a sac that holds a fluid. And the spleen holds red blood cells. Not white blood cells, a little bit. But, only maybe 1% white blood cells. But mainly red blood cells. Why do we need 1.5 to 2 pints of blood, excess red blood cells? Well, let's say you're swinging from a tree a couple thousand years ago, and you lacerated your arm and you bled a half a cup of blood or a whole cup of blood. You'd be anemic, and you'd be good supper for the next cat that came along. You couldn't run or climb. So you have this reserve of red blood cells that goes right into the bloodstream, and you're no longer anemic, even though you suffered massive blood loss. So spleen is very important. If you are in an accident, you have a hemorrhage somewhere, you're a bleeder, that spleen is very important. Then we move down to the kidneys. What do the kidneys do? The kidneys discard water, H2O. And what else? Whatever's in the blood serum, it filters the blood. So what happens is, the kidneys only filters out the red blood cells. So you're not passing red blood cells every time you urinate. That's its only job. It pulls out the red blood cells to allow the separation of the red blood cells, because the red blood cells are very married to everything in the bloodstream, all the nutrients, everything. To get them to separate, the kidneys make ammonia. Horses have obviously, horses have the greatest loving red blood cell system, because they don't like to give up, the bloodstream does not like to give up its red blood cells. So the horse manufactured almost 3 times more ammonia than any other animal, to make sure that those red blood cells can be isolated, so not urinating red blood cells. The rest of your urine is everything that's in the blood serum but the red blood cells. Some people will have, if you're not drinking beet juice, and your urine is slightly pinkish, or on the orange brownish side, you're discarding a lot of red blood cells in your urine, and your kidney's not working well. Or you've got a tear or bleeding into your bladder or somewhere that's getting red blood cells into your urine. Your urine should never be clear. No animal's urine is clear. They're deep yellow to an orange. Some are even brown. Animals don't urinate much, maybe urinate twice a day, and such a small amount of that, their urine will be deep orange, almost a brownish orange, yet not contain a lot of red blood cells. It's very nutrient rich. Your urine is the same thing as your blood, with extra ammonia and no red blood cells, or few red blood cells. That's why a lot of people drink their urine. They recycle the proteins, they recycle everything. Vegetarians in India and also Asia drink their urine because they're vegetarians. They know that by reprocessing their urine, they get those nutrients and get a second chance at it, a third and fourth chance. A lot of them are vegetarians. We drink every bit of their urine all day long. Who in our society drinks urine?
Coal miners who were...
Coal miners did, and astronauts. Astronauts always, that's what they drink, their own urine. Goes in one tube, gets filtered, as if their kidney wasn't enough filtering, of course it is, but then they drink it. So it doesn't taste like piss, but that's basically what they drink. They drink their urine. Well, if it's good enough for an astronaut, why shouldn't we be drinking? Well, if you're a vegetarian, I do suggest that you do. If you're on a good raw diet with lots of raw meat and dairy, I suggest you don't. Because it's a little too acidic. But as a vegetarian, it's a very good thing. So again, here's a byproduct of the body that is safe and healing to have, your own urine. And yet you see all the animals, you take a poop and what happens? You can have vultures, you can have insects, you have dogs, chickens, birds of all sorts. They all want to eat your poop if it's healthy. Why? Because you've got so many rich nutrients that have already been pre-digested and you didn't absorb. Look at a cow or a goat, fecal matter. It's 70% digested. That means 30% is yet to be had. So these animals and creatures and insects eat them, and what is left for ground earth organisms, soil organisms. None of this is toxic. Your shit, your urine is not toxic. These are good nutrients for the rest of the body. Stop being afraid of it. I have people eating manure. Why? Because it is already pre-digested matter. They don't digest well. They eat manure, and what happens? They get well. Sally Fallon, in April, I was with her in a panel talking to the Senate Agricultural Committee about raw milk. And I had heard about the particular case also. This elderly woman was dying. She couldn't digest anything. She had vomit and diarrhea no matter what she ate. So they took her granddaughter's feces and fed her granddaughter's feces to the old grandmother, and guess what she did? She recovered in 24 hours from eating this baby shit. Eat shit and live. I'm writing a comedy book from this perspective called Eat Shit and Live. Will everybody buy it? Probably will. So don't be afraid of your natural organism, all the products, even the byproducts of what you have. Be afraid of the chemicals. They're the things that do the damage. 1957, when I was 10 years old, how many people died of cancer?
1 and 2.
1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000. Now how many people die of cancer?
1 and 2.
In males, 1 and 2. In females, 1 in 3. That's pretty bad, isn't it? I should say, not die of cancer, get cancer. In 1957, there's 1 in 1,000 people got cancer. Now it's 1 in 2 or 1 in 3. Get cancer, not die of cancer. Get cancer, no. But Let me tell you, everybody has cancer at least 5 times in their life. And they go through it. That's what I told this group at Yale 23, 24 years ago. And they came out 8 years ago, and I addressed it in my recipe book. They found that the body goes through its disease and, cancer up to 5 times a year. 5 times in a lifetime. You have a certain level of cancer cells in your body. When you get tested, if it goes over 50 per 100 or 100 grams of body weight, the pharmaceutical says you need to be treated. And that's it. You've got a mathematical measurement that says, okay, now the pharmaceutical and the medical industry can go at you hard. They can tell you all kinds of dangerous ghost stories that cancer's going to take over your body, that you're going to be full-blown, that you're going to be crippled by it, that you're going to live a miserable life. And so you take their radiation, their surgeries, and their chemotherapy, and you're going around barfing and vomiting and crippled, and life's miserable, and you hate everybody. Your family hates you because you're a bitch or a bastard, and that's the way it goes.
And then you die.
And then you die anyway. 17% live beyond 5 years in medical treatment. 17% live beyond 5 years. Why does the medical profession say that you're cured in 5 years if cancer doesn't come up in 5 years? Because normally the body starts regenerating cancer most often in almost 80% of the cases after the 5-year mark. So it's 5 years and 1 day. You got a whole different case of cancer that has nothing to do with one previous. That's what they tell you. It's nonsense. When I get into a debate with these guys, they're speechless. These doctors are speechless because they believe nonsense. They're not rational. And they believe this stuff, and it's all emanates from the pharmaceutical industry, their profits are predicated on you staying sick and taking their medication. And it's a business. No different than the smoking industry, which puts chemicals into your cigarettes to make you more addicted and smoke more. The same reason that the food industry puts chemicals in there to make you hungry and to eat more. They put chemicals into your food so you cannot absorb it, so that you'll be hungry and eat more. They know what chemicals that destroy and interfere with certain intestinal bacteria. They are in a war for your money, not your health. They don't care about your health. They consider you ants that you don't mind killing if they're in your home. They have as much respect for you as you have for ants that come into your house. Only they can make a profit off of you. You can't make a profit off the ant. So you just have to be very careful. Yeah, it's a cynical perspective, but you have to take a look at what is happening. And then you have to say, wait a minute, they're putting these chemicals into food? Why? Why would MSG ever be put into anything? It is not even proved to be a preservative because it causes all kinds of physiological imbalances and greater hunger. Headaches, nausea. So you go for aspirin, you go for all kinds of things. And if a person's got a heavy interest in a food company like General Mills or General Foods, Purina, they've also got heavy investments in the pharmaceutical and medical industry. Hey, it's profitable. If I don't get them with the food, I'll get them with the medication. And it is that sinister. There's a few people that have come out and blown the whistle. He's one. Financial hitman. And that's on the global level too. That's real ugly. Well, this is the global level too. So You know, you have to look at, you have to make sure you know what you're eating and consuming, so you will be in control of your life and your health, just like I am. Doesn't mean I don't get exposed to toxins, but I know what to eat to take care of them when I am. I get on a plane. You don't see me without a surgeon's mask, and I don't have a regular surgeon's mask. I got one in China that was made of cotton, very thick cotton, and that's what I wear. Why? Because what I found out was every time I went flying, and I fly a lot, all over the world, I'll get a neck ache, maybe on the left side, and my legs will get swollen and ache. I never get jet lag, but those are my symptoms from flying. So I was investigating. I stopped going off the chemicals and everything that were, I don't eat anything on an airline. I take my own food with me, so that's the point. I couldn't figure out what was causing the problem. So I found out that a bunch of flight attendants and pilots were having the same kinds of symptoms. So I started searching that on the internet. I found myself in Australia. The union there, the flight attendants and pilots unions, is suing every one of the airlines, from no matter what country, every one of the airlines, because the airplanes are all designed poorly except for prop planes. The fuel exhaust is going right back into the air system and into your plane cabin. And of course, all the airlines denied it. So what the union did, they got detectives, biological detectives who went in there onto all the planes and took swabs off of all areas of the compartments, air compartments, and found heavy jet fuel, fumes, byproducts. I mean thick, we're talking thick. For each flight, there's a major amount of it that sticks to everything. So they're all being sued, and it's in process right now. And that's a biggie. Nobody else knows that. Every flight attendant, pilot I listen to in this country, they don't know what I'm talking about. Yet they suffer the same kind of fatigue. Neck aches, headaches, swollen feet, legs. When I start wearing the mask, disappeared. I do get a little knee aches, but that's from the electromagnetic field. And the electromagnetic fields in an airplane are tremendous. You say, electromagnetic fields, they don't harm you. Sure they do. They cause carpal tunnel. They cause a lot of arthritis and rheumatism. They cause a lot of aching. Oh, but the industry denies it. When I got my first laptop in '93, I had moved into a new house at the same time. And I started getting all this carpal tunnel. And I had been typing on a typewriter, a manual typewriter, where you really have to punch. That's work. Why wasn't I getting carpal tunnel there? Here I'm barely touching the keys and I'm getting carpal tunnel. But I didn't know that it was, at that time, I didn't know that it was a laptop. So I thought maybe there's some radon coming out of the ground where this house that I have, new house that I'm in. So I called an environmental expert. He came in, all of his gadgets, didn't find any radon, found only one socket. The house had been built in 1928 in Venice, California, and only one electrical outlet that was miswired, wasn't grounded properly, and that was letting off in the M field of about 12. My bed was far enough away from it, and except when I was getting in the iron wall to get clothes out, I turned it into a stereo system at that time. Unless I was fooling with a stereo system, I didn't get near that electrical field. But I went under the house and I wired it myself and took care of that. But he said, turn on your laptop. Turned on my laptop, put the EMF meter over that, and the thing needed like boom, 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 all the way to the top, 110 milligauss. 3 milligauss is supposed to alter human molecular structure of cells. 3 milligauss, and this is going up to 110 milligauss from my laptop. So what you need to do, now all computers, even your standalone towers, generate more than a laptop. So those have to be 3 feet away from you. So they're not harmful, but they're still going to leave their residues in your air, in your atmosphere. So what you need to do, you need to use a separate keyboard, and don't use the keypad. I mean the mouse, the finger pad, the touch pad. You have to get a separate rollerball mouse, wheel mouse, not a infrared mouse. They produce a lot of EMF. So my mouse that I have, they don't even make them anymore. I bought 6 of them, so I've got them in storage for, they'll last about 6-7 years each. And so I'll go through, I have them for 50 years. I have my supply for 50 years. But other people can't even buy them anymore. They can go on, online and find somebody that's trying to get rid of theirs. And they're easy to clean, very easy to clean. 3 screws, open them up, and just take a brush, get all the dust out, and they're working again. Very simple. So I got a separate keyboard, got my mouse, no more copper tunnel in 48 hours. Completely gone. A couple times I thought, well, I'm going on this trip, I'll use it for a couple of days. I'm only going to be on it maybe 5 hours at the most. No problem. Guess what? I had mild symptoms of carpal tunnel. Now, always take my keyboard and my mouse that plugs in USB. That's a wheel mouse. Means there's a ball on the bottom, not a light. So I'm protected there. So you've got to learn what you need to do to protect yourself. What is going to harm you? What is going to lead you toward disease? Collectively, how many of these things are going to cause a lot of damage? A little bit, frequently, can cause a lot of damage. I know people who are athletes, tremendous athletes, and they were always telling people, oh, you pussy, it's all in your head and all this. And all of a sudden they hit 48, 50 years old, and they had a complete collapse, complete exhaustion, so-called adrenal exhaustion. No, it was a whole systematic exhaustion because their whole bodies were poisoned. How do you recover from that? It takes a long time. And I look at those guys and say, you pussy, it's all in your head. Then all of a sudden they did it, and they're so sorry. But the damage has been done psychologically to their children and everybody else that has grown up under that influence of thinking that, oh, because they're so healthy and strong, they've got high hormones to protect them for a time, that everybody else who is sick is a pussy. It's a very, very sad, ugly thing, and my family was heavy on that. Very heavy on that. Because all of them were healthy. All of them were raised with raw milk. My generation wasn't. Every one of my cousins, all of us, were sick from a very young age. One that was the least sick, he was a good athlete, a diver. He was great, but he had his asthma. A diver with asthma. Why? Chloroform in swimming pools. He had asthma because of the chloroform in the swimming pools. You've got swimmer earaches, swimmer sore throats, swimmer headaches, chloroform in the water, the chlorine. There's nothing wrong with algae. There's nothing wrong with murky water. But they're telling you it's unhealthy. They want you to have chlorine in your water, which causes physiological damage. That's clean, that's safe. To whom? How? I'm just trying to instill in you the absurdity that is going on out there, so you get it real loud and clear, so you walk away with here non-confused. Okay? So, let's get into food. So we've gone through the human body. Now, a lot of people you hear say the liver, the pancreas, all of these things are filters. They filter out toxins. Toxins build up in the liver. This is not normal activity. The body's inundated with so many toxins, your organs and glands are doing things that they were not meant to do. The human body and all animal bodies are structured to be very simple. the simple tasks that I addressed. If you eat properly, you look at the tribes who only eat raw foods, they have no disease, not even dental caries, not one cavity. You have to look at them and say, wow, no disease, they're always happy? How can that be? The Fulani got screwed with the earliest. Fulani's a tribe that lived in Africa, that lived mainly on dairy. 90% of their diet is raw dairy. 10% is cooked meats. And they're cooked in underground ovens inside big, huge elephant leaves with rocks as they're cooking. So they're built in underground ovens. So really the temperature gets maybe to 150, 160 degrees maximum, around pasteurization temperature, so the least of damage happens. But that's 10% of the diet. They have more weight, they have splotches on their bodies that none of the other tribes that eat 100% raw do, and that live mainly on dairy. They had a British archaeologist, philanthropist, and biologists that came to live with them, got them into agriculture, got them using machines, got them eating processed foods, got them into agriculture besides their dairy. And the Discovery Channel showed a film by this man made over a 35 years period. And at the end, the man said, I ruined this tribe. They now have disease. They now have jealousy. They have violence in their communities, and this never existed before. They were a community where if anything ill happened in their community, the children would mock them at night. They put on a play, and the two adults that had a difference, one would play one of the adults, the other would play the other adult, and these are children. And they'll do the same things, they'll say the same words that the adults did, and everybody laughs at it. They make it a farce. And everybody got over their anger and everything was fine. And that was, nobody hit or punched anybody. The worst things were words. After the whole civilization was changed by this one British man, there was killing, there was violence, there was woman beating, there was all this kind of thing that came from it. The Maasai and the Samburu tribes, up until their drought hit in the last 6 years, that's devastated 80% of their herds. They lived mainly on dairy and raw meat. The Maasai tribes lived on blood for 3 months, blood and milk combination. They had so many herds, their wealth was, the more cows you have, the wealthier you are. You can feed more people, you can, they have a great wealth of civilization. So they never skimped milk for the calves. So when it came calving time, they would bleed the bulls instead of robbing and reducing the amount of milk for the calves. So they took these long bamboos like this, cut them into a fine angle down, take these huge slingshots made of rubber from the rubber trees, and they shoot these bamboos into the jugular vein of a bull. And they'll bleed that bull for 5 days. You see that, I've seen it, and they take this thing and shoot it in the bull, be down there eating, all of a sudden, thing goes into the neck, feels like this, and they go back to eating. You know what I mean? This guy just got a huge thing stuck in his jugular vein. Now he's bleeding, and the cow's going back to eating grass. How healthy can you be till your pain is in seconds and gone? And you say, hey, that was that, I'm going back to my eating. I'm going back to life. We would be catatonic. We would be suing, and we'd be in a hospital. We'd be doing everything. We wouldn't go back to eating food right away. We'd be taking medication. We'd have every doctor and nurse working for us, and we'd be pampered. So what they do is they take a cork and they put it at the end of this bamboo that's sticking out of the bull's neck, and they have this bladder that they use as a pouch. They fill it with half milk first, and then they'll fill it with half blood, shake it up, and then they eat that instead of all milk. And that's only 3 months of the year while the calves are nursing. So, what do you think about that? Blood and milk sound like a good appetizer? Something good? If you've had blood before, you know it's thick, it's metallic tasting, it's heavy. Yucko. I had the combination and it tasted like ice cream. It has no relationship to milk by itself or blood by itself. The combination tastes just like ice cream. I got 6 whole, complete vegetarians to drink it and enjoy it and gulp it. You know, that's amazing that it tastes that good that you're gulping blood and milk together. So it's pretty amazing stuff. And you look at all this and you say, oh, that's primitive, that's ugly. These people are thriving off of it. The Maasai tribe, like I said, has had a 6-year drought now and it's lost 80% of their herd. They are now accepting what? Care packages.
Food aid.
Food aid. What are they given? Dried evaporated milk. Cereals, the biggest waste products that General Foods, General Mills, and Purina can't sell. Mislabeled, bad batch. Can't sell in this country. Sell it to the people who are collecting donations to feed these Africans what? Food that's going to kill them. Food that's going to give them disease. So whenever somebody's out reaching their hand out for aid packages for food, don't get it. Put some dried fruit. If you're going to send something that's not evil, send them some dried fruit. It's a good thing for them to eat. It's not the best. It's enzyme deficient. There are no bacteria enzymes. No bacteria and no active bioenzymes in